We begin this hour, though, with a teen on trial for murder in Texas. 19-year-old Karmelo Anthony is accused of fatally stabbing 17-year-old Austin Metcalf at a high school track meet last year. Prosecutors say what started as an argument over sitting under a rival team's tent ended in murder. The defense says Anthony was just trying to protect himself and acted in self-defense. He has pleaded not guilty. More than a dozen eyewitnesses took the stand in this trial over 4 days of testimony. Karmelo Anthony did not. After listening to closing arguments this morning, jurors have now been handed the case. NBC's Ryan Chandler is outside the Collin County Courthouse in McKinney, Texas. We're also joined by NBC News legal analyst Misty Marris. I'll start with you, Ryan. What did we hear from both the prosecution and the defense in their closing arguments today?
Well, Kate, I'll start with the defense. They took up the bulk of the time during closing arguments today. In fact, the prosecution opted not to start with theirs, opting only to respond to the defense's closing arguments. I think that gives you an idea of the posture in which each side enters the wait for a verdict now. But if there is one phrase that I think encapsulates the defense's position here, it is this, which they told the jury over and over: split second of chaos. They describe that as the moment in which Anthony had to act to defend himself from larger aggressors, and they say he acted reasonably in self-defense to protect himself. Now, the prosecution is making the argument that when you bring a knife to a fistfight, it is unreasonable and amounts to murder. But one notable update today is that first-degree murder is now not the only charge on the table for the jury. They are also instructed now they are able to consider manslaughter if they believe that perhaps Anthony's actions were unjust but not intended to kill Metcalf. And that's what we're waiting on right now, Kate.
All right. Thank you so much for that. And Misty, let me turn to you. Karmelo Anthony, as we mentioned, did not take the stand in his own defense. How much does that decision potentially play into the jury's deliberation?
Yeah, so the jury can't hold it against him. As with any defendant, they have a Fifth Amendment right to remain silent. But when you're talking about self-defense, it's a little different because the standard is both subjective and objective. Subjective, the jury has to believe that Karmelo Anthony in those moments did perceive a threat of serious bodily injury or death, and that his response and his perception of that threat was reasonable under the circumstances. So without hearing from the defendant in a self-defense case, it can be difficult because of that standard, which is really based on their perception of the situation at the time. And
it was mentioned by Ryan, but jurors were given instructions on 2 charges here, potentially murder and a lesser offense of manslaughter. What does the jury need to decide? So
the defense actually asked for this manslaughter charge to be included on that verdict sheet, so it's an option for the jury. The murder charges require a showing of intent, whereas manslaughter is a reckless disregard for human life. So it's a lesser mental mens rea, lesser mental state in order to convict on that charge. So that carries a lesser sentence, and it's what we call a lesser included offense under the law, something the defense wanted on that verdict sheet as an option for the jury.
Ryan, back to you. The judge in this case has ordered jurors to be sequestered for the duration of the deliberations. What does that look like for them, and what was the reasoning?
Well, one of the difficulties throughout this entire trial has been sheltering the court of law inside from the very vocal court of public opinion on the outside. You see, there are protesters all along the front of this courtroom, peaceful but nonetheless outspoken, supporting both Anthony's family and Metcalf's. That's what the judge is trying to do here, is shelter the jury from any outside influence. So that means no news, no social media, no contact with the outside world until they return their verdict, Kate.
All right, Ryan Chandler watching it for us. Misty Marris, thank you both.